Blade Kitten is a largely forgotten 2D platformer developed by Chrome Studios and published by Atari in 2010, and I enjoyed this game way more than I thought that I would. Now, the most essential part of a platformer is, well, the platforming, something that Blade Kitten handled very well in my opinion. This game isn't like Mario, where you're on a timer and you have to collect coins to gain lives, and every level is more or less go from left to right until you reach a certain point. As you have infinite lives, you can move at your own pace, and the levels are surprisingly big and open for what this game is. This title really encourages you to explore, as there are a few directions to guide your path, and there's no map, so exploring is really your only option. And your character, Kit Ballard, a half-cat, half-human, can climb most walls and ceilings, which added to the openness of the levels. And while there are quite a few one-hit traps in this game, checkpoints are really common, so mixing that with unlimited lives, dying really won't set you back much. A bit more about the levels themselves. As is the case with all platformers, there are collectibles for you to find, like data coins and something called skiffs, and a couple outfits are locked behind acquiring these items. Also, you can pick up money, called hex in this game, which you can use to buy upgrades, new weapons, and some costumes, and there are several different kinds of hex, which vary in value, like yellow being worth 10 and red being worth 1,000, and the hex kinda reminded me of the studs of LEGO games for some reason. Anyways, there are also over 100 chests hidden around the game, and they can contain cash rewards or collectibles, and there's an achievement for finding all of them, although I personally wasn't able to pull this off. There are also sometimes items or objectives that are out of reach for your character, but thankfully, she has a pet animal named Skiffy, who will help her reach out of range areas. I think the last thing to really mention about level design is that you can sometimes break walls and floors to reach new areas, and that this game has a few sections where you ride an animal called a newt. Very creative name if you ask me, and it sounds like something from a Dr. Seuss book. Moving on to other things, time to talk about combat. Most fighting in this game consisted of just pressing X to perform basic attacks with your sword and using LT to block, but there were special attacks as well which use stamina, like having a more ranged sword swing, a slide attack, or a move where you jumped on an opponent's head and you threw them, and enemies drop hex upon their defeat. Now, Blade Kitten gives you a grand total of 4 weapons to choose from, and while I did purchase and test them all, I mostly stuck with the final most OP one, because it could one-hit most foes. As far as enemy variety goes, this title has quite a cast, including, but not limited to, worms, giant robots, humans in Halo-like armor, some sort of bat creature, a dinosaur-like being, and more. So this title did a good job with enemy variety. Also, every now and then, you could get zoomed in slow-mo kills, but this was very rare, and I never figured out how to actually trigger these, but it was always nice when it happened. I think the last note I really have regarding combat is that even after getting a couple of HP upgrades, you still don't have a lot of health, but it refills super quick, so I guess it's balanced out in the end. Shifting over to other things, I want to discuss story. Blade Kitten, it didn't really deliver here, as the story was unfocused and all over the place, although there were several funny moments tossed in here and there. But what really crippled the story was that, well, it never saw a conclusion on the 360. Like another game I covered here on my channel, Hydrophobia, Blade Kitten was intended to have episodic releases, like a Telltale game, but the developers never made it past episode 1 on Xbox. However, they did release part 2 many years after episode 1 released, as a DLC for the Steam version of the game, meaning if I wanted to finish this title, I would have to re-buy it on a different platform. that is really greasy and half-washed in my opinion, as it pretty much forced anyone who wanted to finish the game to re-buy it. Like, when the game first came out, according to what I read, it was only on PS3 and Xbox 360. But again, Episode 2 is exclusive to Steam, meaning none of the people who played this game at its initial launch were ever able to finish it. Imagine if, like, I don't know, you were playing the World at War campaign on console, and halfway through the game it stopped and said, to finish this game, please go repurchase it on Steam and then buy a DLC. You would be really, really ticked. Now, I don't hold this against Atari, the publishers of Episode 1, as from what I read, this PC stunt was entirely the fault of the developers, as after the first part dropped, they bought the publishing rights from Atari, and then abandoned the console versions. I also read that the development company went bankrupt, and if this was the kind of stuff they did on a regular basis, I totally see why. You can't publish half a game and then expect people to buy that same game again on a second device, only to then have to buy a DLC in order to finish it. Just no. And what really sucks here is I think that Blade Kitten really is a great game. I had a lot of fun with it, and apparently it's based off of a webcomic series that I kind of want to check out now. But the fact that I paid full price for half of a game without knowing it was an incomplete product, this just sucks. Moving on to a more positive note, the colorful graphics are really good, and the sound effects and the OST are pretty solid, and all the VAs did a really good job. And I could be mistaken, but I want to say the vendor guy is voiced by the same dude that plays Khan in King of the Hill. I could be wrong, but they sound really similar. A couple of notes before I give Blade Kitten a final grade is that this game took me slightly less than 5.5 hours to beat, and that you can go back and replay any level. In conclusion, with all things said, this game is rather hard to grade. If it was a complete finished product, it would easily earn at least a 9 out of 10 by my grade scale. But because I bought an incomplete game with no disclosure that the game was not finished, I have to bring that 9 down, and I give Blade Kitten a 7.1 out of 10 by my grade scale. And maybe I'd be a bit softer if I hadn't have paid $15 for it. Maybe if it was only $5, I'd cut this game a bit more slack. But with the way things are, just a big L here. And a serious question, why have so many game developers tried episodic releases? From what I've observed, they very rarely work, and the only successful one I'm aware of is Telltale's The Walking Dead. Other than that, most episodic games kinda just fall on their face and sometimes are deserted before they're finished. I mean, I'm happy that PC players were able to see Blade Kitten to the end, but console guys really got the short end of the stick here. And that's about all I have to say for this game. As far as similar titles I could recommend, maybe look up a game called Dust Force or The Fancy Pants Adventures. As far as our Bible verse of the day, I read Habakkuk 2:4 NIV. See, the enemy is puffed up, his desires are not upright, but the righteous person will live by his faithfulness. And that's my vid for today, folks. Thanks for watching and for tolerating my horrible narration. For any newcomers here, I mostly review and discuss Xbox 360 games, so feel free to check out some of my other vids if that sounds like your thing. As always, none of my content is ever made by AI, and I don't give consent to my voice and likeness being modified, altered, and copied by artificial intelligence in any way, shape, or form. Jesus loves you all, take it easy, peace. This game isn't like Mario, where you're on a timer and you have to collect coins to gain lives, and every level is more or less. That is really greasy and half-washed in my opinion.